VeloFix is the source for all of your bicycle needs. When it comes to parts as well as repair, VeloFix is there to help you get back on the road. It's a mobile bike shop on wheels. Check them out at velofix.com. And here in Southern California, Paul Dunlap is there at every gravel event, fondo, and bike race to take care of your bicycle and have you get back out there. Check him out at velofix.com.
A lot of triathletes aren't comfortable on the bike, especially in packs. And when it comes to like turning corners fast when you're in a big bike pack, I think that's something a lot of triathletes that are new to my races or doing Ironman aren't quite used to.
This is the SoCal Cycling Podcast with Brian Coe.
SoCal Cyclist, and I'm assuming that's Southern Calcutta. Just kidding. Probably Southern California.
Of course it is, so join us for the next episode. Welcome to the SoCal Cyclist Podcast, the podcast that brings you the people and practice of the peloton. I'm your host, Brian Coe, and today we have an episode dedicated to triathlons. Now, this is still the SoCal Cyclist Podcast, but we are going to bring in the triathlete perspective. How many of you have experienced riding with triathletes? What's your attitude about it, and how do you think they ride? Well, today we're going to get into all of that. We talked to a couple of triathletes, and first we're going to start with Taylor Spivey, who is one of the world's best, and she does the ITU draft legal triathlons. We're going to talk to her as well as get some of the perspective from cyclists on triathletes who show up to their group rides, and then also from Whitney Birds-Alaskas, who is a Ironman/woman distance triathlete. Stay tuned. Taylor, thanks for joining the show today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, you know what? I'm doing fantastic because you're one of the, I think if we had a record of guests, I would say you are the closest in proximity. Taylor actually walked here from her house to the studio, which is unprecedented. Nobody's ever done that. I think I've had somebody ride their bike over, but nobody's ever just walked over, which is really cool. So, you know, for those listening outside of Southern California, this is very much the epicenter of things going on. And Taylor comes to us from the triathlon world. And before you start laughing out there, she's a badass. Let's go through some of the types of triathlons you do and some of your accomplishments.
Yeah, so I race on the ITU circuit, which is an international circuit, and we do not ride on time trial bikes, so it's draft legal racing. In these races, we represent our countries, and the ultimate goal is to get to the Olympics, so it's pretty cool. I love the drafting aspect of the races. It's very different than Ironman, and it's a little shorter and faster pace too.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier, and it seems like the Ironman gets all the attention. I mean, that's what's, Kona, and it's on TV, but for at least for me, who I don't know much about the sport when I'm watching it, it's not that exciting. Like at the start it is when you see everybody jump in the ocean and it's just a bunch of big splashes. But then as it unfolds, you pretty much know who's first, second, and third. But with what you do, it's come down like to a lean pretty much when the triathlon is finished, which I don't know, for me makes it more exciting.
Yeah. The Olympics in London in 2012 came down to a photo finish, so it's pretty incredible.
Wow. Has that ever happened to you, where it just came down to like just pushing your head forward across the line?
Not photo finish worthy, but pretty close. But I think the races we do are a lot more spectator friendly, and I really love to watch them. Like even before I started racing on the circuit, I watched on Triathlon Live. You can just like stream them, and when I would be stuck inside on like a cold day, I just if it's like pouring out in California, right? I would just,
it'll make the news,
Yeah, right. I would just like watch like the London Olympics or some other race that's on the circuit, and just watch the people I look up to. And here I am now actually racing these races, and it's fun to like play it back and actually see myself from start to finish. So I highly recommend watching them.
Definitely. We'll YouTube those. And so the next Olympics is in 2020 in Tokyo. Is that sort of your trajectory?
Yeah, that's my goal. The U.S. women are definitely the strongest on the circuit. I think we had 5 women in the top 20 world ranking last year.
Oh, wow. So USA is definitely a powerhouse. It's not like cycling where maybe there's 1 or 2 people. In triathlon, the U.S. dominates the sport still?
Oh, definitely. Well, on the women's side, for sure. I think it has to do with our like strong collegiate like running and swimming programs. And some of us seem to pick up cycling pretty quickly. And it definitely helps when we're racing in these draft legal races.
Yeah, so one of the things is you are almost the opposite of like an Iron Man, Iron Woman, because they're draft legal. When it comes down to the bike portion, are there tactics involved? I mean, do you work together with your USA teammates in races, or is it just sort of every person for themselves?
It's more or less every person for themselves. Sometimes, obviously, you want your country to win and come in like top 3, which would be like super awesome if it was a full USA sweep, which has happened a few times. But usually the swim splits things up a bit, so it's more a matter of working together to stay away. Or in this last year, the top female, I guess for the last few years, Flora Duffy, she's really made the bike a factor in whether she's in a really small bike pack or just off the front on her own. Her technical handling skills, just in addition to her like sheer power, has made a total difference. And so the bike has gone from kind of being this neutral factor in our races to actually making a difference.
Right. And for you, where does the cycling part rank among your swimming and your running? Like, what do you like? What are you good at? You can say swimming. We won't be offended.
I grew up swimming, and that's definitely my forte because I grew up doing surf life saving. I grew up doing junior lifeguards. I'm an ocean lifeguard in LA. But I've really taken to road cycling and the tactics that are involved. And I'm a very, very tactical racer. So anytime a course is really technical or really hilly, it definitely serves my strength or suits my strengths because I think I can break a few of the non-technical riders. And hopefully, that gives me advantage when it comes down to a run.
Yeah. It's, once you figure it out, it's like chess, you know what I mean? Like, especially the bike portion, because you are relying on a little bit of, you don't just want to be at the front and pull because, everyone's going to come around you. Have you ever done a cycling race or anything like that?
No, I've never done a cycling race. One day I will for sure. But right now my sole focus is triathlon.
Right. Cool. Well, I think that a lot of cyclists can actually, first of all, cyclists tend to be very opinionated people. But with your experience doing all 3, and I know you've ridden with road riders and maybe you've done, a couple of group rides here and there, and then you've swam with dedicated swimmers and run with dedicated runners. Where does the cycling scene sort of stack up? Is it way too cliquey, or are they more casual? Like, what is the cycling perception from your point of view?
I think I had a really easy approach to cycling because my dad is a really good cyclist, roadie, and he's done like Masters Velodrome and just like any sort of like nationals competition, and he's a total badass. So it's really helped me become a better road cyclist because I've had him introduce me to other people on the rides, and other people have like talked me through things, what to do, what not to do when I started. And I think that has been really crucial to my growth as a strong cyclist. And like,
that's your dad's your secret weapon.
My dad
right
is
there.
my secret weapon
because
sure.
he probably taught you some of the ins and outs. It takes other people a long time to figure out.
Yeah, it's definitely helped me become more comfortable on the bike, whereas I think a lot of my fellow triathletes seem to struggle.
Is it a matter of just they just want to be in the lead and pull and try and break away from everybody else, or is it that they just don't want to have to think like a cyclist, like a roadie?
I think it's a little bit of both. When you're new to cycling, I think you have this mentality, if you're really strong, you just want to be in the front. And if you're working harder, you're doing better, right? I don't know. But then I think a lot of it comes down to just like comfort on the bike. And a lot of triathletes aren't comfortable on the bike, especially in packs. And when it comes to like turning corners fast when you're in a big bike pack, I think that's something a lot of triathletes that are new to my races or doing Ironman aren't quite used to. So especially on a time trial bike, like that would be like something I wouldn't be used to if I rode a time trial bike, but fortunately I ride a road bike.
So in ITUs, you couldn't ride a time trial bike if you wanted to. The rules are it has to be a road bike. Can you use like those? We can put
clip-on bars if we want. It just depends on the race, but I don't think it's really necessary in the racing we do.
Okay. Are the ITU courses, do they make it technical, or is it just kind of an out and back kind of course?
They make it pretty technical. So this next race I'm doing is called WTS Bermuda. It's World Triathlon Series. So it's that's like the highest level of our racing. And at that highest level, they try to make our courses really technical. So at this particular race, we'll be doing 10 laps and the bike is about an hour.
Okay.
So that kind of gives you an idea. It's not just like a straight out and back. It's there's a hill in it called Corkscrew Hill, and it's similar to Double Peak here. And there's
Double Peak is now becoming infamous because we had the Belgian waffle ride, which went up it, which is at the end of a 130 plus mile ride on the road in dirt. And it gets steeper as you go up it. And the funny thing is we both did it today.
We didn't
do it together. We just did it at separate times because it happens to be close to the studio, and you can get a quick workout, and you can basically climb over 2,000 feet in less than 20 miles.
Oh yeah. We've done a lot of Double Peak as a training group here. You have like a love-hate relationship with it because no hill in a race can compare to Double Peak, but at the time your legs are burning when you're doing those hill reps for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy. So when it comes to cyclists, why do you think there's this perception of, or what do you think the perception is of cyclists and triathlon love hate kind of thing?
I think like a lot of the like novice, I wouldn't say novice, like just your standard triathlete, right? If they're doing an Ironman, there's really no point to them like practicing riding in a group. So on the rare occasion that they do like hop on their bike and join a group ride, I think they just stand out more because they're on a time trial bike instead of a road bike. And they're also probably just not used to being in a group, and they probably also don't know the etiquette that comes along with that. Like maybe don't sit in your aero bars when you're in the middle of a pack.
You see a pothole, kind of point it out. Don't just go around it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what we did is we went out and we talked to a lot of cyclists, a lot of ex-triathletes who are cyclists, and even current triathletes, and we asked them how they felt about riding in groups with triathletes. So you are at a group ride, it's about to go off, and you see a triathlete roll up to the group ride. What's the first thing that crosses your mind when you see that triathlete roll up to the ride?
Get in front of him.
Why do you say that?
Just because you never know the skill set of group riding. I mean, chances are the guy's got a huge motor and he's going to pull the whole ride anyways. But yeah, you just kind of want to make sure that he earns his keep before you suck his wheel.
For me, safety. I don't like people coming to group rides on tri-bikes. I feel like the handling is not as good. And as a former triathlete myself, I know that's actually a fact. So yeah, that's kind of my first thing is like, I don't want to be near them or on their wheel.
So did you used to do that yourself as a triathlete, like show up to the road ride with all your tri stuff on?
I would ride my tri bike on some group rides, but only with groups I was comfortable with and felt like they knew I could handle my bike. I just don't think that it's harder to control a tri bike. So not that a triathlete may be a poor bike handler, you're just at a disadvantage in my mind on any tri bike, especially in a large group.
I have two initial thoughts. One, who's the kook in the aero helmet? And then two, why is there a triathlete here that is going to absolutely hammer off the front of the group and just kill us all because they're so strong on the road typically.
Right.
So it's usually fear. At occasion, they can get a little squirrely sometimes. And so can everybody else. But it does seem that getting in that aero position on the bike can make some wayward moves a little more pronounced, if you will.
I'm not riding behind that guy.
Why not?
Might be a little scary. No, there's a lot of really good ones, but there's many that come up a little bit short on the group ride skills and the bike handling.
I don't know. Being a former triathlete, I feel bad saying this, but stay away. Danger.
Danger. So the first thing you're thinking is that person is a potential threat.
I think the tri bike is just less stable. And typically, as people ride more, I think that they become roadies. So I kind of expect that person to have less experience.
I've been there. I've been there with that guy. I know it. I would definitely, as an experienced rider, I would kind of keep my distance. Or if I knew the person, then that would be different. Because when I used to come down here, Greg Welch, Mark Allen, all of the pro, Jürgen Zach, again, I raced all against them, so I had no problem riding against them, but certain ones, again, I would just keep a little bit of distance. If I would, I don't know how I'd approach them. Like if they got down in their bars, can you please not while you're in the group, if you're off the back or if, because I've just seen too many crashes or something happening. And I don't want anything to happen to them as well as to us because the cyclists just tend to move really quick.
Don't be behind him, always be in front of him in case he crashes. I don't know.
Are triathletes like dangerous people?
They don't have the best handling in terms of like riding with others. Yeah.
Please don't crash.
And why is that?
Well, aero bars on a group ride are admittedly a little scary. The lack of control that can sometimes happen because of that is, especially if I don't know who the rider is. If it's a pro triathlete or someone who I know as a strong time trialist, then I'm not as concerned. But if I don't know the rider and I see aero bars, my first thought is, I don't think I'm going to follow that wheel. On top of the fact that they get low enough, there's nowhere for me to hide to actually draft on them anyway. And so, at 6'3", I need somebody big to draft behind.
Usually you can tell by their disposition if they're going to smash the ride and it's going to be super hard because they're really strong time trialists that can also handle their bike. Or you recognize, like sometimes I see people and you can obviously tell if they don't have the bike handling skills and that they're going to be a little squirrely. So it's very easy to determine if you're an experienced cyclist, if a triathlete rolls up and if they can handle their bike or not handle their bike.
Oh dear. I think oh dear. I give them credit though. I say, you know what, prove me wrong. Show that you've ridden in a group of road equipped cyclists on drop bar bikes and, don't be in the middle of the pack in your aero position. Make sure they know how to handle the bike. And if they show that they can, then all right, go for it. You deserve to be here. But they certainly got to prove it.
And is that a wheel you want to be behind or you want to get around that person?
If there are putting off a huge draft and a lot of power, I'm going to sit behind that wheel.
All right. I'll think, oh my God, this is going to hurt. This guy or girl is serious. Hurt as in they're just better, like fitter than everybody?
It looks like that person is looking to go real fast today. And I might be up for that and maybe not.
Are they somebody whose wheel you would want to follow?
Why not? I mean, if anything's going to happen, I'm probably able to slam on the brakes a lot harder than somebody leaning on tri bar. So we should be fine.
I guess thinking back, like, it wasn't always a positive thing. You know, it was like, oh, triathlete. But now, you know, I have the utmost respect for how strong those guys are. And I think for a lot of them, their bike handling used to always be a joke, you know, that they didn't have bike handling. But the ones out here and the ones I know now, like, they very much have the bike handling, and they're beasts.
Nice. A group ride's about to start. Everybody's ready to go, and you see a triathlete roll up, full tri gear, aero bars, aero helmet, the whole 9 yards. What's the first thing that crosses your mind?
Am I at the right group ride?
Was that hard to listen to, or would you say that was pretty accurate?
I think those are pretty fair concerns. I mean, when you're riding in like massive group rides, like the Swamis ride here, for instance, like your safety as well as the safety of like the rest of the group is the biggest concern. So if a triathlete shows up at the ride with like like in their aero helmet, right? Yeah. With time trial bars.
I don't understand, why do a lot of them wear arm warmers, but they wear a tank top?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
I've always wondered, but I was too afraid to ask.
I don't think I'm the right person
I'll ask the next person. I mean, I get like no socks because out of the swim, you don't wear socks. So maybe that's just something they get used to. But then you also see the extreme like knee high like compression socks too. So it's like one extreme to another. I don't know. I'm bad at fashion in general, let alone cycling or tri fashion. So
I definitely follow the cycling etiquette rules when it comes to like my cycling attire, so I cannot answer these questions. Every once in a while I might forget to put my sunglasses like outside my helmet straps, but the only reason is because in a race we have to take our helmets off.
Oh, okay.
And so sometimes they get stuck. So I think that's okay. It's acceptable every once in a while. But otherwise, yeah, I really don't know. Like wearing compression socks on a bike might be why runners wear compression socks when they run. Maybe they're doing a brick workout, which is a run after a hard bike ride. I have no idea.
So to be fair, the way you do it is you tend to, other than brick workouts, you pretty much separate it. So when you go out and you run, you're wearing running attire. When you go out and ride, you're wearing a kit. When you go out and swim, you're wearing a bathing suit. So that you tend to keep them all a little bit separate.
Yeah. I mean, in the races we're doing, I want to be the best swimmer, the best biker, and the best runner. And in turn, I think that maybe one day will make me the best triathlete.
Right. So what is something that I'm going to ask you kind of a question and then reverse it. What is something that triathletes can learn from cyclists?
I think triathletes can learn a lot from cyclists, especially in the ITU races that I do. Because they're draft legal, it teaches you a lot about tactics and like how to feel comfortable in big groups, certain etiquette, like pointing things out and communicating to a pack and maybe getting a breakaway pace line going and understanding how that works, understanding how long you should take a pull for, and like all things that you learn on group rides as you go. Yeah,
Okay, that's fair enough. And I think too, a lot of times people who are new to any sport are sometimes just afraid to ask questions. So they roll up, think, well, I can definitely ride a bike because I've done it in competition and in a triathlon. So why would I need to ask, how do I ride with you guys? I think that's part of it. And let me reverse that question. What can cyclists learn from triathletes?
I think, like a lot of the people you interviewed said, that triathletes are really strong. They're not afraid to go off the front, which I think is pretty admirable, because a lot of times people just sit and hide in group rides, and it's totally different when you're on the front. And you work harder, you get a better workout in, you see, so what if you blow up? Like, it's just a group ride. Like, you're getting stronger. Why not, go for it?
Exactly. and I think you're right. Like, a lot of cyclists play it too conservative because they're thinking in race mode, and then they end up not getting the workout they could have during training. There's this one guy who's just always pulls, always, like, we roll out on the group ride, always on the front, then it gets faster. I kind of, peek my head out of the single file, and it's still him. And then, you get a little bit closer, and there's one of those, like, the Iron Man tattoos. I'm like, okay, I get it.
That's why he's so strong.
Exactly. So I think cyclists out there can take a little bit of a cue. It's not gonna kill you if you get to the front, you pull. Maybe you get swallowed up, maybe you don't. But in the end, either way, you're gonna get a better workout in the end. So I think that's a good lesson that people can learn from cyclists for sure. Great. So what's kind of in store in the near future and then sort of long-term future for you?
My next race, like I said before, is the World Triathlon Series in Bermuda. It's in almost a week.
Okay, so by the time listeners are listening to this,
yes.
It's already over. So hopefully you took home the victory.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Hopefully I showcase my really badass technical skills and climbing skills that we just talked about. So that's next for me. And then after that, I'll be abroad in Girona, the cycling hub, Banyoles, which is a little town outside of that. And then I'll do my first altitude camp in St. Moritz, Switzerland, while racing intermittently between mostly in like Europe.
So you're going to live up there to acclimate?
Yeah. So this will be my first altitude stint, and I'll be there for a month. While I'm racing in Europe, and we'll see how it goes. I hope I do it right.
Yeah. Have you ever used one of those those tents that
no.
you'd sleep in, and then it just sucks some of the air out? Or
no, not yet.
Yeah,
I'm not that crazy yet.
Yeah, but
maybe one day.
One of the things too, I think, to triathletes' credit, I don't know if it's more Ironman or ITUs. A couple people brought up the point that triathletes are more early adopters of new technology than cyclists are. Cyclists are a very old sport. A lot of hardcore traditionalists, a lot of people that still want to wear wool jerseys. But I think triathletes early adopt, and they were the first ones to use aero bars. They were the first ones to use compression and recovery. And then you see a lot of that sort of bleed over into cycling, which a lot of cyclists don't want to admit, but secretly deep down they're like, yeah, I put on the compression wear at work, or at home, or they definitely practice their time trial a little bit more. So just the technology on that side. Is it because triathlon is a younger sport than cycling is?
I don't know if it's because they're younger, but I think because it's kind of like, at least in the Ironman, it's like every athlete for themselves. So you need that next thing that'll make you faster, right? And they're not afraid of being a little dorky and wearing compression socks and a tank top on a bike ride if it helps them recover or keeps them cool, or whatever it does. They're gonna embrace it and see if it works for them.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because if you're just relying on yourself, you're going to try every little thing, no doping, of course, but every little thing to get that little bit of advantage. And speaking of doping, do they drug test for triathlons just like in cycling? Or?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, I get drug tested every few weeks, and at races a lot of times, especially if you race really well, you'll get like blood and urine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we have to fill out our whereabouts every day. I say when I travel, I tell them what hotel I'm staying in, and I try to be like super on top of it.
Yeah. I mean, do a lot of, I don't think so, but do a lot of triathletes get popped as much as cyclists do on the pro level?
I'm not the right person to ask about this, but I think like people are always skeptical about certain athletes, and like especially when it comes down to TUEs, which is like you get a permission from a doctor to use a certain banned substance because you have a medical condition.
Yeah, Froome apparently has really bad asthma where he needs like 1 million inhalers.
Yeah. So
sorry, Chris.
I definitely think there's a line that people cross to get that like extra 1% edge. And I don't think it's okay. Obviously, I want it to be a fair race from start to finish. But I think that like USADA and all these anti-doping agencies are doing the best they can to try to make it as clean as possible in triathlon.
Yeah. And sometimes they're a step ahead and sometimes they're a step behind. I mean, have you seen that documentary Icarus where they basically expose the entire Russian doping program?
Yeah, they like drilled a hole into the wall and like filtered urine out of the like testing cabinet. I don't know. It's crazy. So I mean, obviously, if they're going to go through that much trouble, like, props to them for, I don't even know how that was possible. But, yeah, if anyone's out there, I highly recommend watching Icarus to understand, like,
it goes pretty deep, for sure.
The controversies behind doping, especially when it comes to like, sport.
Yeah, for sure. It's as long as there's money involved and high stakes, people are going to do what they can to try and get ahead and not get caught. But hopefully, I'm glad that you keep it clean. USA Tri hopefully has a good reputation of keeping it clean, just like USA Cycling. We're sort of cousins in the same organization.
Oh yeah.
So
sure.
Yeah, it's all good. So Taylor, thanks so much for coming in. Where can we find you at 2020 in Tokyo?
Oh, that's the goal.
That is the goal.
I'll be working hard, more or less, here in Southern California and Europe.
And until then, how can people find you online and on social?
Most of my social media is at TK Spivey, Spivey. That's my last name. Or my website, tkspivey.com, Twitter. Find me wherever.
Yeah.
Your preferred social media platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, if you want to see how she's doing, especially in some of those big races that sometimes they don't always broadcast, you can go to her site, find out the results, things like that. But hey, all of SoCal will be cheering for you, and then hopefully everybody outside of SoCal will be cheering for you as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Coming up after the break, we head to Oceanside for the Ironman 70.3 and talk to Whitney Berdzalauskas. Is your bicycle in need of repair? Have you had a bad experience at your local bike shop? VeloFix might be the alternative. VeloFix is a mobile bike shop on wheels, and what they do is they go to your home as well as your work, and they'll work on your bike right in front of you. They also carry an assortment of soft goods such as tires and tubes, and will get your bike ready for that next event. VeloFix is often seen at many bike races, but can also be seen driving around in case you need them. VeloFix will have a quick turnaround time, friendly service, and they'll go to great lengths to make sure you're a return customer. They are featured in almost every major city in the United States, and their base is growing. VeloFix is a major bike shop on wheels, and what they have inside those vans is just about everything that the bike shops carry. If they can't do it, nobody will. Check them out at velofix.com. Next up, we talked to Whitney, who's a cyclist, triathlete, as well as a coach, and we caught up with her in Oceanside, California.
So I started off as a triathlete back in 2003. I did my first sprint triathlon, and I did my first Ironman a year later. I did do some adventure racing before I met my husband 9 years ago, but he was a professional bike racer. when we met, and so he got me into bike racing. And I've been doing group rides before that, but I'm the typical slow twitch triathlete, so I'm really good at going zone 2 and 3, and not so good at those anaerobic accelerations that are demanded of an athlete during a bike race. And so when we first got married, I tried to do a ton of bike racing, and I was basically pack filler. So I used the bike races.
So are most people.
I use the bike races for training. So I find that I race even an Ironman better if I throw in either some hard group rides or some pretty intense crits right before a big race, just because it stimulates my peak power and my VO2 max anaerobic capabilities. It's just basically scrambles the eggs and does what I'm not already good at. So I know I'm not going to show up to a bike race and win, but if I get a good workout, or I used to race on a team and I would, help my teammates out. But, for me, not being able to sprint or not being able to...
Why can't you sprint? Or, is that something that you think has to do with like your genetics makeup, or is it something that you just don't train?
Both. So, it's all about the law of specificity. So I never when I grew up, I never did anything that was anaerobic in nature. So I never had to go fast. So when my body, one, I wasn't born with it. Two, those environmental factors of, somebody who plays soccer or basketball, or they were a BMX rider, they're going to be better bike racers or have more anaerobic ability and more sprinting capability than somebody like me, who was like the slowest kid on the cross country team, that worked really hard. So that's why. And I could train it more, and I do with group rides, but I don't do the anaerobic and sprint workouts that one would need to do because I don't really care.
But you did race at a high level on the road, right?
I'm currently a Cat 2 cyclist,
okay.
But
that's pretty high level.
It is, but when I race against girls that are, if there's sometimes lots of preems called out and there's lots of accelerations, then I'm doomed.
Most people are at that point, unless they live for that sprint. So in terms of, do you recommend that a lot of triathletes should try road racing or crit racing, or just stick with group rides? Like, a lot of triathletes, especially where we're at in Southern California, come here for the weather, and also any group ride is just as fast as a race in lots of other places. So do you think that's a skill that a lot of triathletes need, or can they just keep doing with what they're doing?
Again, going back to that law of specificity, if they find that triathlon doesn't fill a void, or maybe they do notice that their power isn't very constant when they're racing, and that they have a big range of, they accelerate a lot, and their variability index is a lot larger than it should be, and they're jumping their power around. Maybe that's a sign that they should try a bike race, or maybe it's a better sport for their ability level. As far as it helping out their skill set, I think that it would, for sure. I think it teaches you how to handle your bike better. So if you're in a situation where, car pulls out in front of you, or another biker, in the triathlon kind of swings your way, you can react. Because you're used to having to react all the time. So I think it is helpful, but it's not necessary to have peak triathlon performance. I know a ton of professional triathletes and elite age group triathletes that have never even owned a road bike, or done a group ride, and they're super successful. So but if you find that you do notice that your power jumps around a lot, and that you're really good at like short bursts of acceleration, then you might have a talent that you haven't developed yet.
And I think it's also largely sometimes forgotten, but just race IQ. Some people like triathlons because it's more on themselves than having to rely on a team or the complexities of how a bike race unfolds. Whereas, I'm sure most people's strategies in any bike portion of a triathlon is just monitor their screen and make sure they're not going over their FTP. Is that what you do in triathlons? Like, do you just say, okay, I'm going to set it at 300 watts and then lay it down the entire race and try not to go over or under? Or is it more complicated than that in triathlons?
It depends on the distance, but so I specialize in long course, so half Ironmans and full Ironmans, and so I have a certain power range and heart rate range that I aim for during the race. I try to allow my heart rate to build over the course of the bike segment, and then if I'm having a good day, my power will stay very consistent. Even though my heart rate is rising as I fatigue a little bit, the power will stay very constant. So we have certain percentages that we try to aim for halves and fulls, and those percentages are determined also by how well you can run off the bike. So if you can run off the bike pretty well, you can usually hold on to a higher percentage of your FTP.
Do you start to freak out though if you see your heart rate kind of plateau, but your watts are just going less and less and less and less toward the end? Does it mess with your mind a little bit, or what do you do in those situations?
Well, heart rate is giving you feedback as to what's happening in your body. So if one's power is dropping towards the end of the bike ride, or their power is dropping, but their heart rate is staying the same, then something is wrong. Like they're either dehydrated, they're running out of fuel, they've ridden too hard at the beginning of the race, because your power should either stay the same or go up slightly if you pace the race correctly. If you're not able to put out the work but your heart rate's still high, something is wrong. So it's feedback.
So it is a question of really knowing your body, whereas in a bike race you can almost take risks and gamble and burn 3 or 4 matches knowing that, okay, the race is going to dictate my own energy level. So if I need to attack, I have to attack. But if I don't have to, it's efficiency. Would you say that a lot? So the cycling portion is it the portion that people spend the most time doing in a triathlon?
It's the portion they should be. I mean, for training, they should be doing that
more than swimming and running, for sure.
Right. Unless cycling is their strength, then they should be focusing on their limiters. In the bike portion of a long course race, it depends on who you are, and like the pro field will have to put in some accelerations, and they'll work together in groups to drafting legal. They're not in their draft. They're in their draft zones, right. But they have to work with groups to get off the bike in the position that they want. Whereas the age group athletes, it's not like that at all. Everybody's kind of out there for themselves. I find that when I'm racing age group, the biggest challenge is like where I'm riding next to somebody who's very similar to me, and I have to make that acceleration to get around them and stay out of their draft zone. And then, you might get swarmed a few minutes later by a big group, and then you have to fall back because you have to get out of the draft zone. And then it's just this repeat process. So even though, I can go out and hold 185 watts for 2.5 hours, that's not usually the luxury that one is given, because you have all these other dynamics of other people passing you in draft zones that you have to break and get out of the draft zone, because if you don't get out of it fast enough, then you'll get a penalty. Or if you don't make a pass fast enough, you'll get a penalty. So you do have to change speeds a little bit.
But it is not just like riding on rollers or a trainer. There's a lot more strategy to it, and just more sort of doing quick calculations and quick decisions.
Well, it's, you want the effort to be as steady as possible in a long course triathlon, but sometimes you do have to make, those decisions. Or if a big group passes you, do you sit there and just let them go, or do you stay out of their draft zone and follow them up the road and use them to kind of help you keep pace a little bit faster than you were if you were just out there by yourself? It's and now there's so many people doing triathlons, and there could be 2,000 to 3,000 people out on a race course at one time. So you have a lot of activity going on out there. It's not just a pure time trial.
Right.
So
do you think it's a little bit cocky that some cyclists can think, oh, well, I made it in a career out of cycling, and they can just switch to triathlon. Do you see that as a feasible thing, like if someone was successful at one versus the other?
Yes. So I think it's a lot easier for cyclists to turn into triathletes, especially if maybe they swam in high school or college, or they had a running background at some point. Usually cyclists have a huge VO2, so it just depends on what their physiology is and their body mechanics. It's going to be harder for a sprinter with huge legs to go and be able to run competitively off the bike, and match the likes of, the pro men triathletes that we have today that are running, super fast. But it's not unheard of, and I think that it's cool. It's something new for them to try, and it's a lot harder to go the other way, though, for triathletes to turn into cyclists.
Really? So, like, Andrew Talansky, rode for Cannondale Garmin for years, raced the World Tour, raced the Tour de France, and he's going to be racing in his sort of debut as a pro triathlete. So he's been training the swim and run, we assume. Do you think he stands a chance against the top all-around triathletes?
I don't know much about what his swim and run times are, but if you take somebody who has a really strong biking background and they have enough swim technique and run speed to hold them off on the run, because he probably would have a nice advantage coming off the bike. The top age group men are going to be running super fast, and somewhere between 110 and maybe even under to 115 half marathon. So if he can run a 115 to 120, and maybe, but the male pro triathletes are pretty strong on the bike.
Yeah, they're almost just more fit. I mean, I've done races with pro triathletes who are fitter than me, but when it came down to it, it's not that easily. Just because you're a fitter person doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be successful. You mentioned you don't see it the other way. You don't see people going pro triathlete or high level triathlete to cycling. Why isn't that the case? Why don't you see that?
Unless they're a genetic phenom that has the anaerobic capacity, and they just happen to also do triathlons professionally. It's a really hard transition, because a bike race is, if you think about it, the odds are that they're not going to go pro tour, right? They would be doing domestic races and racing on a professional team doing criteriums and road races. So think about what energy system that's using. Anaerobic, a lot of top end VO2, and zone 1. So it's zone 1, zone 6, zone 1, zone 6, zone 1, zone 6, over and over and over and again in a race. That's a lot of matches. And so your typical triathlete who's probably in their 30s now, right? They have never really trained that energy system, and it's really specific, right? So it's hard. I mean, there are a few people that have.
So is that almost like you can't teach your body to do that because it's too late? Or is it it's just your body's hardwired to just doing a certain thing on the bike that you almost have to unlearn that in order to be... So whoever, say, the top pro triathlete is today, you say, okay, I'll take you. We're going to forget about the swim and run and just do nothing but, high intensity intervals. Like you said, zone 1, zone 6, teach them hill repeats, give them on the occasional super fast group ride. You don't think they could sort of change their bodily hardwiring to get them to be a cyclist? That's harder, you'd say, than?
I think it's a lot easier to become a road cyclist. There's a lot of road cyclists that aren't as anaerobic, that do road races, and they do the stage races, and they kill the TTs, and they're the GC for their team, right? But it is a lot harder to develop the anaerobic system than it is to develop the aerobic system. So, but some people, there could be like I said, the few that have that genetic predisposition for anaerobic, they have a lot more fast twitch than your average triathlete. Or if somebody came from an ITU background, or maybe they did have a background in, they got into ITU because they were an 800 runner, 400 runner on the track or whatnot. There's always going to be those cases of people that are just genetically gifted, and you can train it, but like, tell you what, like you could train me anaerobic all day long and I'm still going to be pack filler in a bike race. Their genetics are a huge part of it.
So for you, when you race in a triathlon, do you have a pre-planned out strategy? Like, okay, in the swim, I'm going to do this. In the bike, I'm going to do this. Then in the run, or do you just do everything off of feel? Compared to, say, like if you're in a bike race, you have maybe a team meeting and your debrief, and then what you're going to do here and there. Do you sort of have to switch mentalities for success in tries versus racing?
So for triathlons, I go in with a plan for each event or each discipline. So for the swim, swimming is not my strength. So it's more about being calm and keeping my form and not going off course and staying relaxed. And then when I get on the bike, I have certain goal wattages and heart rates that I play with. So, if I adjust one, if the other is off, and kind of find a balance.
So you're not necessarily like that, the person down the road, I can see them, they're my competition, I want to catch them. You don't think that at all. You're doing your own thing. Yeah. So it's not a case of, oh my gosh, you start to get competitive just by, I want to catch them in front of me.
I kind of fall into a dream in my own brain for, if the race is 5 hours, I am completely wrapped up in my own head for 5 hours. Even if my competition is up the road, I still have to stay within myself in order to get the best possible result. It's very, process-oriented goals. Yeah.
It's like introspection at its highest level. It's almost like meditative, because you're not talking. It's just you alone with your thoughts in a world of pain. So it's like, at that point, you're like, okay. Does your mind want, what do people think about for 5 hours? Do you play songs in your head? What's sort of a good technique for a good, coping mechanism in competition that people can do?
So I either come up with a mantra, especially on the run. I'll come up with a mantra that I'll start repeating to myself if I need to stay focused. But on the bike, I will break the course down into usually 20-minute intervals, and I just think about fueling and paying attention to my heart rate and my wattage and how I feel, and constantly taking inventory of what's going on. Am I in homeostasis? And if I'm not, how am I going to fix it? And the next thing you know, it's 2.5 hours. It goes by really fast.
And then you have the rest of the day to think about, to replay everything in your head, I'm sure. What's sort of your advice to any sort of strong triathlete that is playing with the idea of getting into cycling?
Definitely to find a local group ride or cycling club, and be very willing to learn and have a lot of humility, because it's a whole nother world, but it's one that will make you a better cyclist at the end. Introducing yourself to the people on the rides and letting them know that it's your first time, or that you don't have a lot of experience, and to give you feedback and advice and constructive criticism, and tell you when the ride's going to get hard and when it's going to get easy, and just to just not act aggressive.
Do you think triathletes have that mentality, if I crushed it in triathlons, I should crush it in cycling, so they're less apt to be open to being critiqued or not taught a lesson, but saying, hey, maybe you should do this? Are they I don't need that because I know how to ride a bike kind of thing?
I think to each his own, but cycling culture, the road cycling culture is much different than the triathlon culture, and I think that it would be very hard for a triathlete who's never done a group ride to even have the remote idea of what the cyclist mindset is and the roadie. I know it from both ends, so yeah. I can I know what what's about to happen before it even happens if a triathlete shows up, but
you already hear the jokes start popping off.
yeah, but you have to be open to learning. It's a new sport, Yeah. Road racing and group rides are completely different than triathlon riding, and they help each other out, right? They are a balance of the two will make you stronger, but you have to be ready to learn how to move dynamically on the road with other people around you.
And then lastly, is there anything current cyclists can do to help foster triathletes? So kind of the other way around. You said triathletes should be, humble, willing to learn. What should be the cyclists on that group ride or in that area be doing when it comes to sort of tri-cyclist relations?
Being patient and, introducing themselves and be like, hey, Brian, name's Whitney. I noticed that you're new to the ride, and if you have any questions, let me know. And then you just keep your space. You can obviously, it could be a triathlete. It could be just some random, guy who thinks that he's going to try his group ride for the first time, who's new to it. Give them their space. And
so you're saying I did it wrong, because when I first met you, I was like, I think you're a triathlete.
Yes, but you said it's because of my saddle, not because of the way I rode my bike.
No. But then I remember on one of the other rides, I pushed you physically.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Yes.
And I thought oh my gosh, I didn't even, because some people that would freak them out. That they'd be wobbling all over the road. But
oh, my husband pushes me all the time.
Okay.
I expect the push. If I don't get a push, I'm like, why didn't nobody push me? Because I love staying up with the group, and once I hit that wall, and I needed that push. If I don't stay with the group, I go quickly backwards, and then I'm riding easy by myself all the way home. So I'm all game for the push.
Well, Whitney, it's been a pleasure. Good luck in the race, and you'll have to come back and do the show again.
Thank you so much.
That's Whitney, who coincidentally finished 5th place at the Oceanside 70.3 Ironman. So congratulations to her. If you have questions or experiences with triathletes, either on your local group rides or just you're a triathlete or ex-triathlete yourself and have sort of made that mental transition from swimming, biking, and running to just cycling, what was the experience like for you? Was the community accepting? Were they a little bit snooty about it? Do you have an experience that you could share? I've only done one triathlon my entire life. I don't know how to run. I don't know how to swim. I mean, I do, but not in a competitive sense. But it's definitely something that in SoCal you see a lot of. And you do see a lot of converts who switch over into cycling. And I think overall, despite the fact that, yes, accidents can happen, people can be squirrely, and people can just be kind of snobby. They look at the aero bars and the time trial helmet and no socks, and they're like, I don't want to hang out with that person. It's understandable. But at the same time, riding is riding. A fit person is a fit person. And I have struggled holding the wheel on some of these, local group rides, especially Wednesday Worlds, where people take their time trial bike out. We're holding 34, 35 miles an hour, and I am in the drops just struggling to hold on, and they're doing at least 200, maybe 300 watts more than I am. So a ton of respect for them. So that's something that, that's my perspective that we could share with. But I want to know what experience you have and where sort of triathletes fit into the cycling world, if at all. So please share it with us. You can reach out to me, Brian at SoCalCyclist.org, or on social media. Instagram is at SoCal_cyclist, Facebook is SoCal Cyclist, and Twitter as well. So that is going to do it. So for Taylor Spivey and Whitney Birdzalauskas, plus all the people that we talked to today on our Q&A about triathlons, this is Brian Coe saying, respect the wave.